Hi, I'm Chris. This is Finding God at Work. Just a reminder that Finding God at Work isn't just a podcast, it's also an online course. Check it out at findinggodatwork.org. Our current series is Divine Disappointments, Facing Pain and Sorrow at Work. A few months ago, I was talking with my friend Nick, and Nick is a really smart guy, very sharp, also very kind. Really glad I have gotten to know him. He's an engineer, and he works in a company that creates drones. So from a technology standpoint, the work is really fascinating. It gives Nick a chance to use his educational background and his particular gifts to solve technical problems, to create new products, and it's really exciting, engaging. It's a great kind of work. But Nick was talking to me about some of his ethical concerns about how those drones end up getting used. The primary customer for his company is the Department of Defense, and those drones are used for warfare. And so we were talking back and forth about how to understand that and the ethics of warfare and how we think about that as disciples of Jesus. And I bring that up not to get into a discussion about warfare, as important as that discussion is, but to bring up the situation that so many of us as disciples of Jesus find ourselves in, of working in an industry that is somewhat morally problematic. And every industry has what are technically called negative externalities. Something about how, in the course of getting business done, the world around the business is negatively affected. So the classic example is pollution. Say you have a manufacturing plant, it's manufacturing a great product that serves society in some ways, but just in the course of manufacturing that product, it pollutes the environment around it in some way. How do we grapple with those negative externalities that are part of any industry? Well, the first thing I want to say is that our response is going to depend on where we find ourselves in the spectrum, right? Some externalities are more negative than others. So at one extreme, there are entire industries that are just clearly unethical and that the disciples of Jesus cannot participate in good faith. So for example, if you're a professional thief, right? If you rob expensive, jewelry, technology, things from people's homes, or somehow, do cons on the internet with cryptocurrency. If you come to faith in Jesus Christ, you should repent of that. You should quit that job and also restore what you stole to the people you stole it from, right? Do that restitution. Okay, that's really obvious. If you're literally a thief, that's bad. That industry is not a healthy industry, etc. But for many of us, we're in a more gray area where the work itself isn't necessarily wrong, right? Like drone technology isn't necessarily inherently unethical, but there could be uses of the technology or of the product that the industry creates that are unethical, or there are other ways that our industry negatively affects society around us. How do we make sense of our responsibility as disciples of Jesus when we're in an industry like that? Well, I think it's helpful to start with our own personal responsibility. What if we face a particular ethical decision? And then we'll move from that into, okay, can we influence the industry in some way? But let's start with just our own character, our own way of relating to other people. And for this, I want to go to Psalm 15, because Psalm 15 is one of the classic Psalms that sort of gives an image of the character of a godly person. And some of the illustrated points that are used in the Psalm are specific to the workplace. And I'm not sure if you've noticed that before. So I'm just going to read the whole Psalm. It's pretty short. Psalm 15. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right, and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, and who does not put out his money at interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. Okay, so again, this psalm is describing basic good godly character. He who does these things shall never be moved. The person who has these character qualities is steadfast. They're secure. They're able to consistently do what's right and love other people. At the beginning of the psalm, it connects that to being in the presence of God. Who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? Part of being close to God is, as he gives us ability, doing the right thing whenever we can. That's part of our life with God, is that life of godly, ethical behavior and decision-making, in as much as it's up to us. But then what are the particular things that are up to us? Well, it talks about our interior life, right? So he who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart. So our interior life is part of developing that character. We've talked a lot about that in other episodes. Then it talks about your social relationships, how you treat other people. Who does not slander with his tongue, who does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend. So in your words and in your behavior towards other people, not harming others, not mistreating others, not treating others unfairly. Then it gets to these workplace examples. It says, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent. Okay, so swears to his own hurt and does not change. What's that mean? Well, basically means if you've made a promise or struck a business deal, you're going to honor your side of the deal, even if the economic situation changes such that it's more costly for you than you originally realized. Who swears to his own hurt and does not change, right? So if you make a deal with your neighbor, like, hey, I'm gonna help you plow your field this fall because you helped me with, my issue with building my wall last spring, and then it rains a ton, and so it's actually really hard to help your neighbor in the mud, and that's more time than you anticipated giving, you still keep your promise. You're still a good neighbor. You still take on that cost. You swore to your own hurt, but you're not going to change, even though the situation has changed. Who does not put out his money at interest? What's that about? Well, in the Torah regulations, the people of Israel were not allowed to lend money to each other at interest. That was considered taking advantage of the person who needed the loan. And so this is basically saying if you have a way to make money, but it involves taking advantage of someone else, you have to forego that way to make money, right? That's pretty straightforward. It's like, oh, I could do something that's harmful to someone else and make some money that way, but I'm gonna let go of that money. I'm not gonna do it. Similarly, does not take a bribe against the innocent. This could be the case of a judge or a witness in court where somebody who wants the case to go in their favor is willing to grease the palms of the witnesses and say, hey, say this, and I'll give you money. And yet we know that's deceitful, that's wrong. And so this, again, is a case of foregoing money, in this case, the money of a bribe, in order to do the right thing. Okay, so in our workplaces, we might face quandaries where there's easy money to be had, but the right thing to do is to say no to that easy money. Again, it could be something as straightforward as theft, right? Not embezzling funds, but it could be more complicated temptations than that. Maybe stretching the truth in a sales presentation so that you can land a deal, right? Maybe making it harder than reasonable for customers to unsubscribe from certain services so that you can get their money even when they don't intend to continue the service. There are these different practices that may face us. So staying at that level of our kind of individual character, how do we think about Christian ethics? Well, for this, I want to go to Timothy Keller, his book with Catherine Leary Alsdorf, Every Good Endeavor. It's a great book that we've used several times in the podcast. And he's talking about how if you take a kind of honesty is the best policy approach of like, oh yeah, we do the right thing because that's good for business, you're not really going to cover all of your bases because sometimes that's not true. So Keller writes, won't there at least be some situations in which the short-term gains for an ethically questionable act will be so great, and the danger to you or your friends so small, that on the basis of cost-benefit analysis, the potential gains vastly outweigh the risk? Of course. And there will even be situations in any field in which doing the purely ethical thing could be financially ruinous, and therefore, according to strict cost-benefit analysis, the risk of getting caught in an ethical violation or fracturing a relationship is clearly worth taking. So at least part of the time, it is bad business to be honest. I can't underscore this enough. At least some of the time, it is bad business to be honest. This flies in the face of the prosperity gospel that says that if we do the right thing, if we follow Jesus, things are always going to go our way. That is not true. And if you believe that's true, it'll be easier to deceive yourself and to rationalize when you face an ethical conundrum where doing the right thing is going to hurt and it requires some cost from you. And that will happen. There will be times in your life at work where to do the right thing, you're taking a hit. All right, Keller continues to write, Christians can take a stand against unethical behavior, even if it means great sacrifice on their part. Fortunately, the storyline of the Christian faith gives believers an ethical bedrock, a much firmer foundation for acting with integrity than offered by the pragmatic approach of a cost-benefit analysis. We are to be honest, compassionate, and generous, not because these things are rewarding, which they usually are, hence the cost-benefit analysis approach to ethics, but because they are right in and of themselves. because to do so honors the will of God and his design for human life. Sometimes, of course, that will put us in the minority and even at a disadvantage. Okay, so this is where our overall vision of God is so important. If we believe that there is no God, or we functionally are doubting that God will take care of us, then when we have this temptation to take care of ourselves and do the wrong thing, or take the hit and do the right thing, if we're not trusting in God, we're going to take care of ourselves. But if we have that attitude of, God is going to provide for me. Even if I take the hit now, I know that eternally, in the long term, I'm secure. I'm safe in the love of God. Then you can take the hit. So that's our first point, is when it's up to you, when it's a specific ethical decision that's within your area of authority, take the hit and do the right thing, trusting that God will bail you out, right? And that bailing out may not be short term, it may not be immediate, but long term, God has your best interests at heart and he will provide for you. Okay, but what about that bigger context of your industry, right? Let me give some other examples. I have a family member who's a conference planner. She travels a lot for work in airplanes. That contributes to climate change over time. Or I work at the food bank. We receive gifts from the local casinos. I kind of feel weird about that because I think that casinos, their profit model, their business model is essentially profiting off of people's gambling addiction. And gambling addiction destroys lives. What do we think about these kind of gray areas, right? Where it's not that the work itself is necessarily wrong, but there's some aspect of it that has that negative externality. Well, what I want to suggest is, in as much as it's up to us, we can choose to take the hit to minimize negative externalities. In as much as it's up to us, we can choose to take the hit to minimize negative externalities for the enterprise too, right? Like if the enterprise is 98% as profitable as it would have been, but it significantly reduces its negative externalities for society and the world, that's probably wise for that corporation, that enterprise to take that 2% hit, right? But sometimes it's not up to you, right? Sometimes you're answering to other authorities, to shareholders, to the executives, etc. And so how can you influence things when it's not just in your domain of authority? Well, here's where you can advocate for that take the hit mentality, even if it's not fully up to you. Let me give a Bible example here. Think about Esther. Esther, if you need a reminder of the story, she was Hebrew. She was taken into the pagan Emperor Ahasuerus's court as part of his harem. Very, sexist and evil system to begin with. Within that setting, she finds out about a plot against her fellow Jews. And there's an advisor to the king named Haman who has essentially gotten the king's write-off on destroying the Jews as a people, on a kind of violent onslaught against them. And the king doesn't realize that Esther is a Jew. So what does Esther do? Esther decides to use her influence with the king to protect the vulnerable, to protect her people, even at great cost to herself. It's risky to talk to the king in the first place because he's the king, he's the emperor, he has this authority to even kill people that annoy him. It can be that serious. But it's also dangerous because she's outing herself as a Jew. She's revealing that she's part of this community that's currently under legal threat and violent threat. So this is chapter 7. This is kind of the climax of the story here. Starting in verse 3, Then Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. She comes out and she says, It's me, it's my people. These are the ones who are under threat. She takes that risk. And because she takes that risk, the way the story turns out, those people are rescued. They're able to defend themselves, and it leads to a kind of salvation moment where the faithfulness of God for his people is utterly clear. Okay, what did Esther do? Esther did not have the authority to minimize the quote-unquote negative externality of this action against the Jews. Okay, obviously I'm stretching the sense of negative externality. Obviously, violent conquest is different than polluting the atmosphere. But go with me here, okay? Esther is identifying this negative externality that she doesn't have the authority to stop. But she does have the authority to take a stand. She does have the authority to risk her own reputation, her own safety, in order to influence those who do have authority. So I think that's our even more challenging example is that if we're in those industries where there's sometimes those negative externalities, how can we put ourselves on the line in order to encourage the authorities to minimize those negative externalities, even if it means that the enterprise takes a hit? Might not always be popular, but that's the kind of biblical vision of courage that we are given as disciples of Jesus. And so I just want to leave you with this encouragement to follow Jesus wherever he leads. These things take discernment. I don't have a lickety-split easy answer for how to handle pollution or airplane travel or Department of Defense contracted drone manufacturing or casinos donating to food banks. These are complex questions, and the individual decisions have to be discerned in the moment. But as you do that work of discernment, follow Jesus wherever he leads. You won't regret it, even if it's risky, even if it's costly. You won't regret taking that leap of faith to follow Jesus. Lord Jesus, show us how we can follow you in the crux, in the moment where we have a chance to influence things for good or bad. Help us to take a stand that honors you. Give us wisdom about when to speak up and how to speak up, how to challenge, and how to put it all on the line, how to swear to our own hurt and not change. Jesus, do your work in us as we do our work with you. Amen.
Thanks for listening. Finding God at Work is a production of Mission Central, a ministry based in Aurora, Illinois, dedicated to forming Christians for mission in everyday life. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to this episode to get 10 minutes of teaching on faith and work every Tuesday and Thursday. To get resources to go deeper with each podcast series, read our blog, and get info about upcoming courses on faith in the workplace, go to our website, missioncentral.church.